Hi, I'm BJ, and this is the Arcane Alienist Podcast. Hey, everybody, welcome to season 2 of the Arcane Alienist. Why is this season 2? I guess I kind of felt I had a long hiatus, and I'm trying to get refocused on some things. I've got some new games that I want to try out, which I'll talk a little bit about in the main segment for today. Some old games that have been on hiatus that I want to get back into, and I'd like to refocus a little bit on the world building for my homebrew setting. You know, we that's one of the games that we kind of stopped for the time being using old school essentials. And I want to again, what I'll talk about later today. Maybe some tweaks that'll go into both the mechanics and the world building as I continue to kind of create my own setting. Um, so that's when I felt like maybe just starting this episode off as season 2. How long will it last? How many episodes until I decide it's time for season 3? I don't know. We'll find out together. Hopefully, we'll find out together. I hope if you're listening, you'll keep listening. Tell all your friends to listen. Anyway, but before we get into the main segment today, I've got some Carls. I got a call from Carl Rodriguez of the GMologist Presents, and then also have some calls from Jason and Daniel. So let's start with this call from Carl.
Hey BJ, let Daniel know that he is more than welcome to play in our Monday Traveler game. It happens every other Monday at 7 p.m. Central Time. There's a couple other dedicated players who have lots of spreadsheets, so hopefully that doesn't discourage Daniel. And they just like to keep track of stuff, and it saves me time. But it's pretty fun campaign. I don't know if we're going to delve into they're kind of just space trucking. I don't know if they're going to delve into a particular set adventure, but we've been running a lot of classic adventures that have either been redone or I've reworked from Classic Traveler. So yeah, it's been really fun, and I like space trucking, and things that the player characters have done have been kind of cool. So they might be rewarded. Hint, hint.
Oh, thanks, Carl, and I'm sure Daniel will hear that warm invitation, and maybe he'll take up the opportunity to join us and learn a little more about Traveler. Daniel, the ball's in your court. Just reach out to me or Carl if you want to get involved in the game. It has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed playing it, and hope that campaign continues for some time because there's a lot to do and a lot to see in the travel universe, and I think the rule system really allows for that level of expansive, variety of adventures and all the different elements of space opera and sci-fi you'd want to get into in a role playing game. So again, thanks for the call, Carl, and now we will hear from Jason.
Hey BJ, Jason here. Just finished your feedback episode for RPG Day. Reference Daniel's call. I think he did correct himself, but of course BRP does have advancement. It's just slower. And I don't have a problem with that for a long-term game. If you're only playing like a 6-session game, then I could see, well, but then you're not going to probably level up in your characters anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I don't know. I don't mind BRP's advancement where the skills you use get better, but I guess it just depends on personal taste. There's nothing wrong with either way. He mentioned dice pools, and dice pools can be okay, but at some point you're adding more cognitive load, and you're kind of taken away from the role-playing part of the game, and you're delving into the mechanical part of the game once you throw dice pools in there, because especially dice pools with fiddly mechanics. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, both Daniel and I enjoy, one of the reasons we enjoy AD&D and we enjoy the TSR era games are all the subsystems. We played Top Secret and really enjoyed bouncing between all the different subsystems in that game. But at some point, you're adding extra cognitive load with dice pool mechanics where I don't necessarily think you need to. So I think they're more of a novelty than anything, honestly. But that's just my opinion. I don't know. And Ubiquity is supposed to be one of the better implementations of die pool systems. So we'll see. We're supposed to be playing a game of Ubiquity on September 6th. Maybe you can join that. Who knows? That would be cool if you could. But I'll let you know how that goes. Talk to you later.
That was Jason Connerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Thanks for the call, Jason. Yeah, my personal preference is for quick and easy dice mechanics. The fewer rolls, the fewer counting, the fewer things you have to do once you roll a die and consult it to see what the result is. I like that to go fast so that you can just move on with the game. But there is a certain tactile satisfaction of rolling the dice and rolling a handful of dice and things like that. So, I probably depends on what day you catch me, which I would prefer. I think, dice pools instead of, it's probably a matter of what you want out of the game mechanically, in terms of how swingy are the dice, how definitive are the dice, because you get different probabilities of different results based on how you build a dice pool. So, I can see the argument both ways. I know, like, games where, I'm using an ability and I have this die roll represents my ability score. But instead of a skill that might enhance my chances with whatever task I'm doing, adding just a bonus or a penalty, I've now got or particularly if it's a bonus, I now just add another die. So maybe I'm rolling a 20-sided die for my ability, but I get to put in a 6-sided die for my skill. Or if I'm, if it's an even better skill, maybe it's an 8-sided die. There's an option for like that for doing that in 5th edition D&D where dice replace the proficiency or skill bonus when you're doing stuff like that. So it's probably just a matter of preference. You're right, and probably a matter of kind of what the goal is for the game. At some point, the mechanics ought to support this, the play style, the genre, the overall goals of whatever game you're playing. But thanks for the call. And you mentioned Daniel. We've got a couple of calls from Daniel coming up here, so let's take a listen to those. Oh, and speaking of Ubiquity, yes, as it turns out, I will be playing in that game, and as of the day this episode drops, we will have played. So maybe I'll talk a little more about it in a follow-up episode, but trying to get this one put together and in the queue to publish before we play. So, but yeah, by the time this episode drops, Jason and I will have played in a Ubiquity game along with Joe Richter of Hindsightless and Carl Rodriguez of the GMology Presents. And that game will be run by Anthony Boyd, Runeslinger of the Casting Shadows podcast. So we've got a whole Anchor All-Star team going on to play that game coming up. So I'll talk more about it later.
Hey BJ, Daniel from Bandits Keep Calling In. I just finished up your episode 31 of RPG a Day. Really good thoughts there. It's funny because when you kind of went to does this mean like what will we take on a desert island? The first thing that shot to my head there, because I also have that problem, right? Like I play a lot of different games. It would be hard for me to say what my favorite is, really, and I don't know. I mean, Jason had a pretty good answer, I think, by kind of talking about the game that's been around, the one he keeps picking back up, right? Because I guess your favorite in that moment, right? Kind of like what you said, you sit down, you play a game, that's what you scratch the itch at that moment, right? So it's your favorite right then, but you may never play that game again. So I guess the ones that come back are the ones maybe we find are our favorites. But anyways, to get back to that, when you said that, the first thing I thought was, well, that would be easy because I would take OD&D because I could totally make anything I want with it because it's so simple. And then you kind of went the same direction, like you'd make your own game. And I think that's it. Like, I don't think if I could only play one game, I think I would want a simpler game because I'm a house ruler. I'm a build your own world person. I'm a let's create this with my group around the table kind of person. So the last thing I would want is this massive rules tome that I had to basically know inside and out because eventually you would know it inside and out. And I think the problem with that then becomes you're stuck, right? Because if you're only going by what's there in the rule books, then you if you haven't been training yourself on some level to homebrew, then you won't really desire it and maybe you won't do it. And I think that's when a game becomes stale. So to me, the simpler games, which I know it's funny because I talked to my friend KR and he often talks about how can you sustain a long campaign with a simple game? But I often wonder, can you sustain it with a really complex game that doesn't keep feeding you more stuff? Like imagine if these games that have all these rules and stuff, then they never gave you anything else for it. What would you do? Like how would you move forward? I mean, I know what I would do, and you, obviously, because I've listened to your podcast a long time, you are also one that loves to create your own worlds. So maybe that's not an issue for somebody who is diverse and plays a lot of things, but if you just picked up a game and started with this complex game that had everything done for you, and you never kind of got the thing, the message or whatever that's in every game, right? I say every game, but most games, do your own thing. But, a lot of people don't do that, and I think they get stuck and they hit a wall. So I think that the favorite game is the one you create, whether you create it from scratch or you homebrew what you've got or you mix games together is probably the perfect answer. So really, really good. I like that answer a lot. That's always good hearing from you. I will stop rambling now and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for the call, Daniel. Daniel is actually going to be very important to this episode, and that was actually a nice setup into the topic. In the last episode, we had a call from Daniel where he mentioned having a mechanic in a game that sort of, you might have a core mechanic that works for a lot of stuff, but then you might want to tack on something that speaks specifically to the genre or the style of game you're trying to make for a particular game, whether it's genre or a tone or something like that. So I think we're kind of picking up on that thread again here. Of tinkering and the system that you make, and I kind of feel the same way. I would probably want on a desert island a simple system that kind of forms a good chassis for all kinds of games, which you could then tinker with and add to and subtract from in order to fine tune it into whether you wanted to play a super deadly game, a casual game, or whether you wanted to go between science fiction and fantasy and horror and westerns and spies and things like that. That would be pretty cool. But and of course Daniel's mentioning OD&D, original D&D with chainmail. I think he's got almost putting the finishing touches on his own system version of original D&D with chainmail as the core combat resolution mechanic. Unchained, I think, is the name for it, Daniel, right? So what you need to do, because I'm about to talk a little bit about taking from a couple of different systems and putting them together, smushing them together. But Daniel had some real discussion that's relevant to today's topic on a couple of episodes where we're going to be talking about magic, and particularly magic spells and spell books and things like that. So what you need to do right now is stop and go listen to 2 episodes of Bandit's Keep, which I have linked in the show description. So it's okay. Stop this one, pause this one. I'll wait, and then after you've listened to those episodes, come back and we'll pick up with the discussion. Okay, you're back. Did you listen to the episodes of Bandit's Keep? If you didn't, shame on you. Go back and do it. Oh well, we'll carry on here. You can go back and listen later if you didn't. What Daniel was talking about in those episodes that I wanted to highlight was the discussion of a wizard's spell book or a magic user's spell book, and how way back in Holmes Basic, this idea was I think maybe where it was introduced. Of wizards not taking their spell books with them, having to leave them behind, and then they've just got the spells that they've prepared for the day, and they venture out for their adventure. Of course, I think the setup there, we're talking Holmes Basic. This is very early D&D, but had only been around a few years. Was you're probably leaving, a base of operations in a nearby town or city and delving into the dungeon for a day, and then coming back out and resting and recuperating and going back. So you've got your spells that you've prepared from your spell book that you prepare in the morning, you set out, you go to the dungeon, you adventure, you come back, and you can repeat it the next day.
So the idea of a wizard, at least in Holmes Basic, carrying their spell book with them everywhere they go is not there. And then there's a later reference, and first edition AD&D is not my forte. I know in Unearthed Arcana there are rules for a main spell book and a traveling spell book, and the main spell book is bigger and it has a much larger capacity, but it pretty much is going to take up the entirety of a backpack, versus traveling spell books are smaller and more portable. And there's, it talks about the size of them and the weight of them and how much they encumber you and how many spells of different levels they can hold. So there's this precedent in D&D of wizards not taking all their spell book or all their spell books. I mean, there's also reference, I think, early on of wizards having multiple spell books. Again, the idea of having a library, which is typical, I think bears out for wizards in sort of the fiction, and even in D&D derived fiction. I think of Raistlin Magir and Dragonlance, and Fiston Donalus, who kind of inherited a lot of his legacy from. Between the two of them, they've authored this great library of spell books and arcane knowledge. So it's not like he's carrying his total collection of spells with him everywhere he goes. And so, independently of that, I started looking at Knave by Ben Milton, which is a very rules light. It's a complete, and I'll have links to Knave in the show description. And they just finished a Kickstarter for a second edition. But Knave is, I think it started off as sort of a hack for D&D. But it is a complete system, rules light system in and of itself, but there are also instructions of how to blend it with old school games. And so I think it particularly blends well with original D&D, basic D&D, the different variations of basic D&D, Holmes Basic, BX, BECME. And then it also, retro clones like White Box role-playing or Old School Essentials in particular, my favorite. It fits well there, but what Knave does is it takes sort of a modern D&D approach to characters. Other than it's a classless system. It's not a levelless system. It is a classless system, and you don't see that very often. You either have class and levels, or you have sort of a skill-based, system. I don't think you often see one where there's a class, or there's no character class, but there are distinct leveling up and prescribed benefits that you get for attaining a new level, which is interesting. And I'll get more into that later. But what it does is it takes sort of what you would be familiar with if you played sort of contemporary, post TSR D&D, 3rd, 4th, 5th edition, Pathfinder, things like that, and you have your 6 standard D&D ability scores. They really drive a lot of what's going on. So everything you're doing, you're rolling an ability check, or a saving. They call it a saving throw because as a 5e, saving throws are just ability checks. They're not defined anything distinctly other than they're a type of ability check. So you basically boil it down to the 6 ability scores, and you roll. And rather than getting into all kinds of modifiers and bonuses and penalties and things like that, you just roll against a 15. That's all you do. You're rolling against a 15, and you can have advantage or disadvantage as the situation may apply. But then as your character gains a level, not in a class, just a character gains a level, they're allowed to enhance and increase their ability scores so that it gets easier and easier to beat that target number of 15 on the roll. So it's a very simple, straightforward system. It's easy to understand. It's also familiar enough that it's not going to seem out of place if you've been used to playing other kind of more contemporary types of D&D. But it also, if that's your introduction to fantasy role playing, it also is a good way to learn some basic concepts and then move on to some of the more complex stuff like 5th edition or Pathfinder or things like that. So So I found that a very nice system, because what it does though is it then bridges a way to use that sort of way of developing and managing a character. Again, you can use sort of its way. There's a description of how to build monsters or create monsters, and also a list of spells you can use it. So it is a complete game in and of itself at this point. But you can also plug elements of it into other games, so you can still play, which is what I'm going to be doing, is playing Old School Essentials with this sort of trying it out with this sort of more contemporary approach to characters. And so what that does is it sort of gets away from the asymmetric leveling, because there's no the classes aren't in there. Now I don't want to go that far afield, so I do have a way of maintaining the 4 basic character classes from Old School Essentials. Clerics, fighters, magic users, and thieves. But they're not really a class. It's more like, here's a talent you have that sort of interacts with this system, so that there's a little bit of a niche, but it isn't that you get a new class ability every time you level up. It's still just about increasing your ability scores and your hit points. That sort of talent you have just interacts directly with the simple rules to give you just kind of a couple of things you do better than everybody else. So I try to keep it really simple. But the thing that I really want to emphasize with Knave, which I thought was really cool, which what got my wheels turning, is in Knave, and this translates over into Cairn if you're familiar with Cairn or any of the derivatives of Cairn, because Cairn is a blending of some rules from Knave and some from Into the Odd. In Knave, the default system for Knaves is a spell takes up a full slot in your inventory. You have a certain number of item slots in your inventory that are basically your Constitution score. So if your Constitution is 13, you have 13 item slots. Large weapons and heavy armor take up more than one slot. So bulky items can take up more than one slot. And a spell book, the way it's written in Knave is a spell book contains one spell, and you have to cast it from the spell book. There's no memorization. You read the spell from the spell book, and it casts the spell. But a spell book only contains one spell. And I got to thinking, depending on how you want to define the size of a book, I mean, if and you're going to hold it and read from it in a round, which is you typically think of as a matter of seconds. That's got to be something you can like grab out of a side satchel or that you can manipulate that really quickly. It can't be huge. How does that take up the same amount of space and encumbrance as, say, a shield? And I know a lot of this is abstraction for simplicity, but you want a little bit of versatility and things to make a little bit of logical sense. And I kept thinking, how can you narratively explain why a single spell, a book containing a single spell, takes up that much space in a person's inventory? And anybody can cast it. You don't have to. It's not because there's no classes in Knave. Anybody can do this. So you're really, whether you want to be more of a warrior type or a thief or a rogue or a spellcaster, really depends on how you equip yourself. Because if you're going to gear up with enough armor and weapons to kind of emulate a classic fighter, you don't have much room in your inventory to have a bunch of spells. If you really want to load up on spells and emulate a wizard, you're not going to be able to have room left over for heavy armor or a lot of weapons. So you get that inherent way of sort of you can make your character into a classic archetype of what the classes in D&D represent, but you do it by how you equip yourself, not by restricting yourself to one rigid archetype. So that's a really cool element of Knave. Now, I just told you I'm going to try something a little different, and we'll see how it works. But what the wheels I said really got turning is how do you do that? Well, if you think about some of that precedent I mentioned from Holmes Basic and a little bit from AD&D, there's this idea that a wizard can't carry all the spells that they know, possess, have written down somewhere with them. I mean, you could potentially then, if you're using the Knave system, collect more spells than you could carry around. What do you do with them? Well, you're going to have some sort of home base of operations where you leave your extra spells and pick which ones you want to carry with you. But rather than preparing them for the day and then going home every day, you might. I'm going to be journeying for a few weeks here. The essential spells I want to take with me, based on what I anticipate I'm going to be doing on this particular adventure or this particular trip. But again, why would they take up so much space? And what I arrived at was, well, what if instead of them being written on paper, what if this being a book with vellum or parchment sheets bound in some kind of leather or hide? What if the spell itself is like a metal tablet, and then the runes for the spell are engraved into it? Or it could even be a stone tablet. Yeah, that would be hard to carry around a bunch of those in your backpack and to whip them out and sort through them quickly and things like that. That would be really difficult. And then I got this image in my head of, a book, but it's not an actual book where you can flip through, but it's not not paper with a leather binding, but it's actually these metal plates stacked on top of each other, and then they're bound together with like iron rings or some kind of system of brass hinges that keep them collected and organized, so you can flip through them. But it's still this big, bulky. You probably in a pinch crush somebody's skull with it. If they get too close, as an improvised weapon. That kind of a spell book. And now, okay, well, no wonder that takes up all your inventory, and it's very difficult to carry much of that around, and you're going to have to decide which ones you take with you and which ones you leave. So that's the concept I came up with there, is that for a homebrew campaign, and then this may become sort of, the way I do it in the Mythic World of Erd, my own homebrew setting that I've been working on, and I want to get back to developing it a little bit now. That would be maybe a somewhat unique thing, is that in this world, spells have to be written. The runes have to be written, and then the way to cast the spell is you have to read it out loud, say the magic words, read the runes, and then that activates the spell. That's how spells work. Because there's so much magical power inherent in that. If you don't put it on metal or stone or something hardy like that, it's just going to consume whatever you've written it on when the power is released. So a scroll, for example, paper, parchment, vellum, maybe even etch something on wood. That's going to destroy that when you cast the spell. It's just going to consume it. But if you put it on metal or stone, and etch the runes into those, really etched or carved in there, that's hardy enough that it'll survive and it can be used, over and over again. So that they got that, yeah. So yeah, you can get these, and then you got envision sort of, if you're going to build magical contraptions or permanent devices, portals or chair, something doorways, maybe a magical chair you sit in, and things like that. They're going to have to be made out of metal and stone, or the magic is just going to destroy whatever it is you've just put runes on and enchanted, right? So it speaks to some world building and some concepts of what the world would look like and how things would work. But with regard to spellcasters, well, they would have a collection of spells, and they would have to have some sort of sanctum or library that is secure, so that that's going to be ripe for thieves or rival spellcasters or other kinds of people to want to take it away. So there's where you get sort of the idea of a wizard having a tower, where he would have an imp or a demon bound to the room to protect their spells, or a golem or something like, or at least magical traps, right? Or maybe a temple. If we're talking about someone who's more like a cleric, they can secure their tablets in a temple when they're not using them, where there are other people to kind of watch out and protect them when they're out out in the field, or a mage's guild. That could be a benefit of being part of a mage's guild if you're a wizard, is you can secure your collection in the vault for when you're out and about, and they have your dues ensure that you've got the guild's protection, magical protections and wards and and guardians and things like that to protect your property, right? So again, it opens up a lot of world building opportunities to do it this way. So starting from, okay, well, you can put it on a scroll and it vanishes after you cast it, or you want it in this plate form. And the other rule in Knave is it can only be cast once a day. Once you cast from the spell book, or now we're talking about a spell tablet, it can only be used once a day, and it needs a day to sort of recharge and regather whatever, energies or magic or whatever that it uses. So you have to be very judicious with your spells. We're kind of back to, again, a really old school. I think if you look at original D&D, and Daniel, I'm calling, correct me because I don't have original D&D here in front of me as I'm recording this. I think, at least with chainmail, before they moved into D&D, the wizard just had their list of spells, and when you cast a spell, and you crossed it off the list, you used up that spell. And it was only much later the idea that you had slots that you would fill with your spells, and so you could memorize or prepare the same spell more than once. That was a sort of a later development in D&D. Originally, it was the wizard just had their list of spells that they could do, and it was all kind of, I can use this once for the purposes of this battle or this encounter or this adventuring day. So it kind of gets back to that as well with Knave, that you can only use these once, and then that's it for the day. If we're talking about a healing spell, well, you're going to have to collect more than one tablet if you want to be able to cast Cure Light Wounds more than once a day, right? Or you're going to have to acquire some scrolls. And so the next thing I thought of was still being able to scribe a scroll from a tablet. Now in Knave, it says it's implied that these are like artifacts that characters can't copy or reproduce. It's just something they have to quest for. It's part of the adventure. Because in Knave, the idea is you're all kind of roughshod adventurers out looking for treasure and fortune. That's the implied setting of Knave. But here we're just looking at sort of the mechanic of things. In keeping with the idea that you can scribe a scroll, but you need the magical spell on a tablet, a stone or a metal tablet, to do it. So what I came up with was kind of again referencing Holmes Basic, 100 gold pieces of materials and a week's worth of time to put a first level spell. You've got to have the tablet, and then you can create a scroll from it. 100 gold pieces, 1 week per level. And then the scroll is consumed as part of the process. So you can't copy a scroll to a scroll, because what you do is I have a scroll of a first level spell, I copy it to a new scroll, and the original scroll is consumed, and now I've just got a copy of the thing. I still only got one scroll of that spell. It's there's no advantage in doing that. But copying it from a tablet, and I thought, well, it would be kind of nice to give characters the option of having a tablet created. I don't know where I'm at on that, because that begins on you got to think about the time scale and how long you want to allow adventures to be out of circulation. But I would think that would have to be a monumental, to produce a few of these tablets would be the life's work of a cleric or a wizard. And so, what would 1,000 gold pieces in a month? That's kind of what I originally started out with. I don't know if that's the right amount. I'd be interested to hear other people's thoughts on that. But somehow, there's a way to, again, you can take the scroll, and instead of using it as a one-use magic item, I can create a tablet, but there's a lot more money and time and effort invested in that. And potentially even, I don't know, it's one of those things where you don't want to do a gotcha thing. I think I do like the idea of having to make an intelligence check at the end of that process, at which point, if it doesn't work, you got to start over. Again, though, then you got to weigh that against, well, how much time does that create, and is that a fun activity for characters, or is that something you want to make them able to, hire out to a specialist to find a wizard or a high-ranking priest who could do this for them for a fee? I'm still working on that, but at least the idea that, hey, if I can't carry my collection of spell tablets with me and I got to lock them in a vault somewhere, in downtime I could somehow efficiently get some scrolls made so that I at least have a bunch of scrolls with me that I can then use as. And I think Daniel, he referenced that in the discussion in the episodes that I've referenced. Again, if you haven't checked them out, go check them out. And so, a wizard or a cleric maybe have more a few of those core essential. These are the ones I always want to have with me. Tablets, and then trying to. First, I'm going to work through my scrolls, right? Because I can reproduce those, unless I find a scroll that's just unique, and then I got to figure out a way. Maybe I want to save that till I can figure out how to get that recorded permanently on a tablet, right? So that's where I'm at with the way the spells work. So anybody can cast. I did want to, like I said, I want to do a little bit of niche protection. So I added a rule, which Cairn does this. It requires you to make an intelligence check to cast a spell, even though it's using these knave style spell rules that you additionally have to cast you have to make an intelligence save to cast it, because there's ability in Cairn to sort of enhance the spell, and there's disastrous results potentially if you fail. Keeping with kind of the old school essentials D&D aesthetic, I don't know if I want to go that far. But anyway, I do want to say, ordinarily, anybody else, because we're going to be using the wizards, the magic user spell list and the cleric spell list from old school essentials, there are two types of spells. For cleric spells, those are divine spells. You have to make a wisdom save to cast it from a scroll or a tablet. For magic user spells, those are arcane. You have to make an intelligence check to do that. So again, any character can do this. Now, I've come up with a system where people are either a fighter, a rogue, a wizard, or a cleric. And the key sort of talents of a cleric character is they can turn undead, and they can cast divine spells without having to make a wisdom check. The key feature of a wizard type character is they can cast the arcane spells without having to make an intelligence check. Now, they could also cast each other's spells if they have the tablet, but they still got to make that ability check, right? And the fighters and rogues, and if we ever come up with one approximate any other type of classes, we'll cross that. I've tempted to say if a character's an elf, maybe they don't have to make the intelligence check on arcane stuff just to reflect the sort of the history of D&D style elves. I don't know if I'm there yet or not. But at least that's how it would work for wizards and clerics, right? They don't have to make the appropriate ability check for their area of specialty, and they're the only ones who can then scribe spells back and forth between scrolls and tablets. And so if you want your character to be committed to being a wizard, you would take this sort of wizard package of that ability. You more efficiently and effectively cast and are able to enhance and increase your repertoire and your collection of spells. If you want to be a cleric, same thing. You have to have a holy symbol and dedicate yourself to an order, and then you can more efficiently use these clerical divine magic spells and things like that. So, incidentally, if you're curious what I came up with, because I've already started to play test this, I went out of the gate with my son and one of his friends. Was the rogue archetype, which neither one of them took. Gets the backstab, and then when you roll that ability check, because the ability check rolls everything, they get instead of rolling a 15, I think you got to roll a 12 for thief-like things. Sneaking, hiding, scaling walls, picking locks, traps. So sticking with the core mechanic of Knave, that it's an ability check. It's a little bit easier for them to do it as a thief type character, to do thief-like things. And then for the fighter, one of the rules for Knave is in combat there's a straight up attack, and then there's what they call stunts, which is a lot like what I would call a mighty deed of arms from Dungeon Crawl Classics, and those are trying to disarm an opponent, trying to shove them over the edge of a balcony, trying to trip them and knock them down as part of your attack. You can do one or the other in Knave, and when you have advantage in combat, you can do both. You can either choose to attack with advantage, perform this sort of maneuver or stunt with advantage, or you can just do both without advantage to either one. And so what I basically said to sort of replicate what fighters can kind of do in Dungeon Crawl Classics is the fighter is the one character who can do both every round. They can always attempt to stunt as part of their attack. They can't attack twice. They can't do stunts, but they can do an attack and a stunt without having to have advantage. If they do have advantage, then they can either make a bonus attack. They can either apply advantage to both their attack and their stunt, or they can sacrifice the advantage and they can get a bonus attack. And so it gives the fighter a little tactical thing. I don't think it'll be too game breaking because other than sort of these things that I'm talking about, we're going to be using old school essentials, which is BX, monsters, spells, magic items, equipment, things like that. So it really required minimal kind of conversion. If you take a look at Knave, you can see, if you're familiar with old school essentials, take a look at Knave. You should be able to see how you can just mix and match as desired, which I really props to Ben Milton of Questing Beast for producing that. And I'm really excited to see what he comes up with for the second edition of Knave. Anyway, that's it. I'd like to hear what people have to say. I didn't think it would. I'm 27 minutes talking about this. I didn't think there was that much information to convey on this particular topic. But, and to close it out with a final thought on this, what I came up with, the sum total of, which is the title of this episode, those stone tablets are going to be really unwieldy and probably something people aren't going to carry around for very long and or want to put in a safe place. But the bulk of those spell tablets are going to be the metal plates because they're easier to carry around. They're not as bulky. You can again kind of collect them into kind of a book-like structure. That was kind of so naturally I think, or the idea that the stone ones are probably ancient and from when people were first learning to do magic and with more modern advances in metallurgy, we converted to metal tablets, right? So anyway, the idea is that magic is now heavy metal magic. It's heavy metal magery. To have both clerics and wizards having to have these spell books of these metal, heavy, dense metal spell books. So I like that idea. It's heavy metal magery. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. That's the end of the episode. I want to again thank Daniel and Jason for their calls. Make sure you check out their podcasts in general, particularly those 2 episodes of the Bandits Keep that I've linked. Go check out Knave. It's a really cool system. Probably a good time to start looking at it because we're about to get a second edition with some more ideas. So anyway, that's episode 1 of season 2 of the Arcane Alienist. And I'll be back at some point. I'm going to try to get one out once a week, but I'll be back with an episode later. Hope you're doing well out there. Take care of yourselves, and I'll be back. Thanks for listening to the Arcane Alienist podcast. The music you're hearing is Come and Get It by Scott Holmes Music. The cover art is by Dave Bone. Be sure to check out his stuff at ironseer.com. You can leave me a message. I have my SpeakPipe account linked to the show description. You can also send me an email at arcane.alienist@gmail.com. Just embed a voice memo, or I'll just read the text to your email during a future episode. Once again, thanks so much for listening.